Welcome to Goalie Science, presented by Resilient Hockey, your premier hockey rehabilitation providers, and that is our new intro. Welcome. I'm Ben Cernick, as always. I'm here with Jamie Phillips.
JB Phillips, new little rebrand. As Ben likes to point out, king of rebrands. I've rebranded my businesses many times, but yeah, we had talked, and we'd heard from John, which we hadn't heard from John, who's, for those that don't know, is our partner at Resilient. He's a doctor of physical therapy, and we talked about it, rebranding, and since a lot of our topics are really only goalies, actually not a lot, almost all of our topics are only goalies, and we are science people. Goalie science, so we can actually talk about things with evidence, a little bit of opinion, but hopefully mostly evidence.
I was gonna say, like, when you said with evidence, I was really excited. I was like, is there like a multitude of new evidence that I don't know about?
No, it's not really. I mean, our topic today is a little bit. There's no hard and fast evidence on goalies, so a lot of it will be speculation and drawing from other positions. But I did pull up a few studies that I guess, well, studies are studies, and better to have some than have none, ultimately. So off season's coming up, and that means Ben and I are in our push for the anti-goalie specific training movement, and we can get into that another time. But I had a parent reach out to me because I posted on Instagram just some pictures of some very muscular gymnasts, muscular sprinters, and doing the full splits, some incredible shoulder range of motion. Sprinters were doing this like in crazy force hurdling, which requires immense flexibility under high speeds. And the purpose of those pictures was just to show that you can have muscle and be strong and still be flexible and still be able to move and still be athletic. And so I spoke to a parent, and they had asked at what degree is there too much muscle or too much, and that brought me into the thing where it's too much weight. And so I want to preface with, whenever we think of too much muscle, what's the first thing that comes to our mind? It's Arnold Schwarzenegger. Easily,
Yeah, well,
like,
I think it was just
bodybuilding.
Right?
Yeah, just like bodybuilding. And one that's just it's so unrealistic you can't develop that muscle naturally. And I mean, Ben knows I'm very pro PEDs. That's another conversation. I'm very pro PEDs. So for me, it doesn't.
Hold on. Let's be an explicit caveat. If you are playing a sport,
oh yeah, if you're a drug
tested,
yeah,
don't do that.
No,
don't listen to Jamie. But
if you're
someone who really wants to push yourself to your like highest physiology, and you're not in a drug tested thing, and you have a rigorous team of doctors supporting you, there's potentially a discussion for that. But I don't want you just throwing blanket statements here.
Oh,
don't want me in. Don't want me in your group.
Yeah, you're true. That's why I said I am, and not. It's not like every Olympic athlete no one has ever taken PEDs.
No one is. There's no drugs in sports.
Anyways, that's another topic for another day. But the ability to put on muscle mass like that is incredible. It's just impossible naturally. And two, we can get into it, is just like the SAID principle, specific adaptation to opposed demands. So your body is going to find the sweet spot to where it operates the best. And so that's what we do in training when we say it's okay to add muscle, it's okay to be strong, because those are physical attributes that help the game. And when you go onto the ice, your body is going to take those adaptations and use them in the best possible way. And so this conversation where I talked to Ben and I said, when is there too much? I'm going to say this for mass, and mass is going to include muscle mass and fat mass. So we're talking essentially, when is a goalie above a weight that is an unhealthy playing weight for both performance and for injury? And this one, we're not giving specific body fat recommendations or anything like that. Of course, if you want those things, there are a lot of experts out there to work with. I know, one thing I do is I help a lot of athletes improve body composition. But we're going to take a little bit of the research in terms of body composition and injury incidents in hockey players that has been done, especially in collegiate hockey players, and talk about it. So Ben, with that topic right off the bat, like what are your initial thoughts, and then gathering from the evidence and the studies you've looked at, like what do you see when it comes to being heavy, whether that's both muscle or fat?
Yeah, I think like the thing, then Jamie, I'm gonna hit you with something that you said last week. It depends. Right off the bat, I think one of the biggest misconceptions you already talked about is this idea that like being really muscular requires you to be really heavy, or requires you to be physically extremely large
Or slow.
If anyone, yeah, or slow.
Yeah.
That's another thing too. But I think if anyone has ever watched, participated, or are even just aware of different weight class sports, things like wrestling, weightlifting, I guess even to some degree, mixed martial arts, just generally, there is people who are extremely, extremely, extremely strong, fast, and agile, who are able to get stronger, faster, quicker without leaving the weight class they exist in. So I think one of the biggest misunderstandings is that a lot of getting stronger in general and is neurological. So this idea that your body just becomes better at producing force and therefore you're stronger. So that's one of my first caveats I like to always throw in this discussion, is that, excuse me, when you're dealing with this sort of topic, when you are talking about body composition, getting stronger, and changes that might make to your body composition, a lot of strength gains don't necessarily lead to putting on a ton of body mass, especially if you're just not eating enough to put on said body mass, which is something I know that you talk about a lot, Jamie.
Yeah, it's just the people really overestimate how easy it is to add muscle. Yes, some people will add it on easier. And obviously, if you're going through puberty, it's going to be a lot easier than if you're 30 or if you're 40 or 50. But you have to eat so much food. You have to lift so incredibly heavy. And if you're training, I guess this is a broad thing, but you train like an athlete, so running, plyometrics and things, and not strictly doing hypertrophy training, you're not going to add excessive amounts of muscle mass. And so it's when I made that, which post did I make? I made a post about like training like an athlete, not training like a goalie. And someone who was part of team, whatever, I'm not going to name it, said, so you're telling me that if I just train CrossFit and train like a bodybuilder and go to yoga and go practice, that's all I need? And so essentially I was just like, yeah, man, don't forget to do some lateral movement. Because he's like, well, they only train in one plane. I'm like, yeah, I've never said don't train in one plane. You can lift weights. Like CrossFit is awesome, man. Like CrossFit's a really good way to improve a lot of physical things. Obviously, if you just go to classes randomly, there's no structure to it, and that's not ideal. But the movements, there's nothing wrong with them. And just because we like to squat doesn't mean you can't do a lateral lunge or you can't do a 45-degree bound. No one's saying that you can't do these things. It's so ridiculous that this happens.
Well, I think also, like, I mean, I feel like people should be over this at this point.
They're not.
I was like, anyone that, yeah, I mean, like, well, I was more going to say like over this in terms of even the things like CrossFit, where it's like CrossFit is not the perfect solution for an athlete who wants to get a completely serious athlete. I'm finding that's not the best choice, but it's also not a bad option just to do something, right? Like there's a misunderstanding around like if people's ideas of CrossFit is just like gymnastic movements that look bad and weightlifting that looks bad, right? Yeah. That's what people associate with the word CrossFit. I've worked at a bunch of CrossFit gyms in the weightlifting side of things. A lot of the time the programming's pretty good, right? Like a lot of the times it's a strength. You do a strength component, you do something. So just like it's just silly. If you really break down what's being done, you gotta remember this is the same people who take things like anti-rotational core movements too seriously, as if that is the unlocking key to being a super athlete. It's
you should never do
very specific.
You never should. then what's the point of our rectus abdominis? You mean it doesn't flex the spot? No, can't do it. Can't do
No,
it ever.
yeah. So in that discussion, I always kind of I just tune out immediately now. I don't really have time and energy for it. I think there's a lot of ways you can train and get better. I think you can never back squat if you don't want to back squat. I think you can never Bulgarian split squat if you don't want a Bulgarian split squat. Like you just don't have to do stuff. There's a lot of options. But that's not what we're talking about today. We're talking about body composition. We're talking about bringing science to it. Luckily for us, there's a few papers that have looked at body composition in hockey. Bad news for us. A lot of the time, they just exclude the goalies right away.
It's just so much easier to exclude the goalies. I love when I read the limitations, and it's like we did not consider we did not include goalies.
We didn't. We kicked them right out. Yeah. So a little bit of a glimpse behind the curtain for why people might not know about this. But a lot of hockey research excludes goalies for two reasons. One, the first reason is that when we talk about doing research with humans, one of the conditions a lot of the time is this idea of anonymity for participants and respecting people's privacy, especially if there's health details involved. And a lot of times, because a team only has 2 or 3 goalies, they can be identified by their participation, like specific information about them. And some universities really don't like that when you're doing research. They don't want people to know what position that is. That's something they do. So that if you see goalies are excluded, sometimes it's because the researchers were literally not allowed to include them. So let's not blame the researchers there. But on the second hand, this is where I'll blame the researchers. Sometimes goalies are excluded just because there's not nearly as many of them. And when you're doing research, you need enough people in order to actually gain any information from something. And so if you're doing a study, and a lot of these studies do really only work with 1 or 2 teams as their participant group, if you only have 4 goalies, it's just not enough people to make any claims on. So they say, we're not even going to use the goalies. They're kind of different anyway. So as always, unsurprisingly, when looking at the hockey research in this story, we see the same thing. There's no goalie involvement. So we're stuck trying to understand if there might be something that is going on with body composition and performance in ice hockey, body composition and injury prevention, injury risk reduction, whatever you want to call it.
Yeah.
And the one thing I'm going to say is, as much as we have a little bit of information, we don't have a lot of answers here either. Which is, like, for example, there's a good study from 2018 that looked at 37 Canadian university ice hockey players. Now, as someone who played Canadian university ice hockey, I can tell you that you have a full range of athletes at that level, where you have people who are in incredible shape and who are still training really hard and still want to play professionally or be serious with their career. And then you have guys who are not. So depending on who's involved in this study, you might see kind of an interesting selection pool. And what this study did find is that there's just like a large range of different body types we see in hockey. Like in this study, 37 people, the body fat percentage range was between like basically 10 and 27%. That is massive range there. But that's not all too surprisingly, right? You still hear stories of people at elite levels who may have a not super lean frame, but are still really good athletes, right? And I think if we start looking at some of those results, so this study looked at body composition in NHL fitness tests. You're probably not going to be very surprised to find out, Jamie, that if you weighed less, if you had less fat on your body, you performed better with things like vertical jump, with pro agility tests, with long jump. Now, the one thing I want to explain, and this is probably a little bit deep, but I really want to say this, I'm a big believer in explaining science properly. In a study like this where we have 37 people, in a study like this where we have Canadian university hockey players, and in a study like this where we don't have, where we're just looking at kind of body composition and these tests that they're just kind of throwing people into, it's not super surprising that we see these results, because my first belief is, yes, the person who probably has a lower body fat index, as well as having more lean mass, probably trains more, probably takes it more seriously, and so is probably just physically in better shape. And they might just be better at these tests, again, from being in better shape? Does it mean that being leaner, being less body fat here makes you better at these things? Or is that just an explanation for someone who's actually working out versus someone who's not? And that's what I think is an important caveat. Because if you just look at this study at the superficial level, yes, the person who is in better physical shape, so less body fat, higher lean mass percentage, so more muscle. When we say lean mass, it's typically muscle, bone, and organs, but we'll mainly focus on the muscle. Unsurprisingly, those people did better on all these tests, on all the NHL combine tests. But that shouldn't surprise anyone. What do you think, Jay?
No. And I was just going to say, you actually took the point that I wanted to say right out of my mouth, so I'm a little rattled at that. But when we look at the studies done in like Division III college hockey players, professional hockey players, they're on the surface, there tends to be an association with a higher body fat or a worse body composition and injury. And likewise, there seems to be a correlation with improved body composition or higher lean body mass in terms of less likelihood of injury. Now, is that saying that if you are lean and shredded and sub 15% body fat, you're going to be safe? No. Like you said, it probably, keyword here, probably means those with a more improved body composition are, whether their diet, their training, their recovery, when their natural genetics are just they're taking a little bit more seriously. And so if someone is taking a little bit more seriously, say they're training harder, they're significantly stronger, they have more muscle, we can draw a possible explanation from someone that is stronger and more muscle typically is a little bit more resilient when it comes to certain things, especially say, we don't look at goalies in these studies, but if you're getting body checks all the time, just the ability to absorb, I guess, just force on the body and on your joints, having more muscle and having stronger muscle is going to make you more naturally resilient than someone who doesn't have that. And then also when you look at, and a lot of these studies are taking at the beginning of the season fitness testing, and then they track them throughout the entire season. So there's so much goes on in it. And again, if someone with a better body composition is, they should be able to, perform better for longer at higher percentages of performance throughout a long season than someone who doesn't, theoretically. So because we can't draw hard and fast conclusions from these, we're just kind of looking at the variables and piecing it together as best we can. But again, it's so, look at Phil Kessel. Like, Phil Kessel doesn't have the greatest body composition. That's not a surprise. The guy has a crazy Ironman streak. I think he's the longest running Ironman currently.
Yeah, we also, this is going to be, someone fact check me, but apparently Phil Kessel also is just like an incredibly good lifter in the gym. Like, apparently
I've heard that too.
Strong.
Apparently
he just he's like, the last I heard of this, again, and someone please fact check me, I'd love to actually get the real number on this, but I heard that he was an over 400 pound squatter, which is strong, like super, super strong.
Yeah, and we've talked. I don't know if we've talked about it here about Instagram. We talked about how there are some studies that take squat strength into the correlation. The stronger, heavier your squat, the less likely you are to get injured. And again, it goes back to just being generally a stronger, better athlete probably reduces the likelihood of you getting injured. Although that doesn't ever make you immune to injury.
Yeah, that's okay. So I think that's a really good way of saying it. I think that there is not, the only thing that keeps you immune from injury is not playing. It's that simple, right? So some of the research I do looking at training load, we talk about load management in basketball where they just don't play people. It's that simple, right? You get hurt less if you play less.
Yeah.
It's not this magic formula of predicting injury. It's just reducing the amount of exposure to potentially being injured. But I think there's something you said that's really, really smart, which is that the more exposure you have to different types of training, the more movements, the stronger you are through a wider range of motions, your body has experienced those positions before, right? So my favorite example of this is anyone who can't do the splits. If you put someone under anesthesia, so you put someone out for they would be for surgery, you can put them in the full splits, right?
Yes.
So Yeah, and that's like kind of the really cool fun fact. So a lot of our body's apprehension to doing certain things or inability to do certain things is our nervous system basically telling us that, there's too much going on for us to handle that. So I think that's really important, is that understanding that when your body goes into positions that it doesn't want to be in, it sometimes gets unhappy, especially, in a hockey setting.
It's under
Um,
load too. We've
yeah.
talked about how, I mean, there is no evidence to support that getting injured is a range of motion or flexibility thing, and there's limited evidence to support that it's a strength thing. But when you look at getting injured, it's typically going into range of motions under load, and your body cannot handle that load or that force. So whether that be a GTO issue or a muscle spindle issue. And so it's a nervous system issue rather than range of motion. Like you said, if you put someone under anesthesia and you can put them in the full splits, and someone gets injured, tears their groin going to the full splits in a game, it's not because that range of motion was lacking. It's because they put the force of their body in position where those muscles cannot handle it. And so that's why we talk about training and loading the muscles through full ranges of motions, because it's better for performance, it's better for that possible injury reduction, and it makes you just an overall a better athlete.
It's better. Look, it's better to be stronger through a wide range of positions, and I think that's a fine blanket
Yeah.
statement to make. But I do want to
And
bring
like
this
there's
back
actually
to kind of
this sorry, I was just gonna say I was listening to another strength podcast, and they were talking. There was a Division III football player, freshman, so 18 years old, who just cleaned like a really nice 201 or 202 kilo clean, so over 400 pounds, and it was very nice.
445 pounds.
Yeah, and so
43 pounds or whatever.
they were the guys had a good point where they said personally they'd probably never ever have one of their athletes test that, and I would agree. I mean, when you get to testing day in football, like that hype is real and you get the adrenaline. But the thing is the ability to do a 202 kilo clean is the most important part, not being able to do it. If you have that strength, that ultimately means that everything you have done leading up to that has put you in this position of success. So when he goes out in the field and he's getting absolutely crushed every single play, his body is built up that strength and resilience to be able to accept almost 450 pounds in a full squat. His shoulders, his torso, his core had accepted that. Just like when we go out as goalies, if we are strong and say we can do a 220 pound Bulgarian split squat for 8, like when we go out and play and we catch our edges under full speed, where our body has that ability to absorb that eccentric force and be able to push across. And if someone, not saying if you have to do that, or that's the benchmark, but if that ability to do that puts you at a better position than someone who doesn't have that ability. And that's what we emphasize so much with strength training. But we got off track here, so I'm gonna bring it back here. So I apologize. So I have only ever had one goalie who's been overly muscled, and his dad played in the CFL, and he is just naturally a muscular guy. So I've had athletes that have been had not the greatest body composition, even improved it. So when we look at goalies, this is 100% hypothesis from the top of my brain. We have no evidence to support it. But we talk about being a goalie and how it's not a great position for our hips and knees, especially our hips with that massive internal rotation and repetitive force. When force is mass times acceleration. So the extra mass, math's up. So the extra mass we have, that means that's extra force being put into our joints. So if someone is, say, 30 pounds overweight, we're getting that extra 15, 16 kilos times the force of gravity every single time we do a butterfly. And so potentially carrying more mass than what we need could possibly increase the likelihood of getting injured. And this is all hypothetical. And there's so many variables into it, but I think that's also why our bodies tend to fall into that natural playing weight throughout a season.
Yeah, I mean, like this why put on the record. I'm gonna say that I disagree with your overly nuanced hypothesis. I'm gonna say that it's fine. Like I don't think your stance is unreasonable. I just like don't think you can say it. I don't think we have anything to say we can say it. I don't think there's anything that we can pull from that's like that extra if you're, if you're whatever 20, 30 pounds. I think if you've been playing at that weight for a number of years or playing within that weight for a while, your body's probably just used to it. That's not to say you might feel better at not. That's not to say you wouldn't feel better at a different weight, but I think the amount of repetitions that goalies do, especially as we get older, I think there is you have such an adaptation period that your body's probably just used to that. And I don't think we would expect to see any more injuries in heavier goalies than lighter goalies. I just don't think when we look at that, we would find much.
So yeah,
because the variability within that range is so small. Like I don't have the numbers pulled up to me. And now that Ryan Miller's no longer in the league, we don't have an 150-pound goalie in the league as far as I know. But I'd imagine that most goalies are probably within 30 pounds of each other. And if you adjust that for height, so if you take the weight by height, I bet you have a really small range across the NHL. And we could have looked this up. That's on me. I didn't want to do the math on 90 goalies today. So I just think that's something to keep in mind. I think that we can say that you might feel better being leaner in general. Like, I don't think it's wrong to say that getting up and down probably feels easier if you're lighter, but I don't think we can say that you're going to be putting more difficulty on your body as a injury construct if you're a little bit heavier. I'm super comfortable saying from a performance perspective, it might be better to be a little bit leaner overall just because you're moving less mass around. But from an injury perspective, I'm not going to agree with you. So there's our first disagreement.
Yeah, no, and the thing is we'd have to have a longitudinal study throughout so many athletes to prove it. But so I had this hypothesis back when I played pro, when I looked at different goalies throughout organizations that were consistently getting injured, tended to have excess body fat. And so that's kind of where I came up with that hypothesis. Again, it's just a hypothesis, but then that also ties into, is it possible that they're not taking their training and diet as seriously? Is it the extra mass?
What's the organization doing? Yeah.
Yeah.
Right?
So we don't know. And so those are definitely things that I've noticed in many goalies throughout organizations, and so that's purely anecdotal, but although you can disagree with me that that's the stance, but there is going to be extra force put on the joint when we increase mass no matter what.
Yeah, but like I don't know how much that matters. Like it's so much less when we really think of things, right? Like this is going to be, I'm going to butcher these numbers, but going upstairs is what, 3 times body mass, running 6 times body mass impact on your joints. Like, I think the multiplier is already so high, aggressively stopping as a goalie. Like, I think if in your example of changing directions, right? So your butterfly sliding, you need to catch your edge and change directions. I think the force multiplier of body weight to, we'll call it on the hip, is probably already so high that, you know what I mean? Like the extra 20 pounds is small relative if it's a 9 times body weight difference, right? Like, yes, it's going to be more for sure, but like it's already a ton of force, right? Like, is there just like a threshold? And also,
we don't know what is that threshold, and
we don't know anything.
Yeah, like what point are you exceeding it? But then it comes to that argument. It would be like if you had improved body composition, maybe you have a little more lean body mass to be able to support that amount of force that's going through your joint over the long term.
Yeah,
over 20 mil, like almost 1 million butterflies or whatever you put in over the course of like 10 years.
Ugh, that sounds terrible. I just like, this sounds awful. I'm just saying, like, I don't think that even, I think you don't even need to even look at that angle, especially on a performance lens. Like, I think right away, I think if you're a serious hockey goalie, I think if your goal is to play in university, high-level junior, win a state championship for your high school, whatever your goal is, I think it's safe to say that taking your training seriously, including diet, including fitness training, including your sleep and your recovery, I just like don't think we need to even dive into the necessity around the injury talk. I think can just be like, there's so much demonstrable proof, there's such a good line of reasoning to be a better athlete and be a better performer by taking all those things seriously, that I think the injury thing just might not matter because of the rate of weird injuries that happen in hockey already, right? Like the amount of random concussions a goalie has, like that just shows up. The amount of
Yeah.
times we talked about high ankle sprains a few weeks ago, right? Like there's so many injuries like that in hockey and football. A lot of contact sports where stuff is just unpreventably just a consequence of things happening, that I think we can take on this discussion of body composition. We can just leave it in the performance lens. As much as us as rehab people want to be a rehab thing, it's like when I started looking at training load, I wanted training load to be this great injury thing, and it just probably isn't, right? So if it's not training load that's injury, it's probably not body composition. It's probably just a combination of absolutely everything, and any little thing we do probably isn't enough unless we were also changing everything. So my final stance is just like, yes, having more muscle is good. Being stronger, being able to produce force is good. For each individual person, there's probably a limit where you feel worse. Like my weight fluctuated. I know that when I was playing, I felt better when I was about 175 pounds. But in the off season, when I was training a lot, I know I'd get up to the 185, 190 range. And when I was skating, it would be harder. Right. At that point, I wasn't, even though I felt stronger and I felt like my pushes were harder, I was tired faster. That's just how I felt. Right. And I know that when you were playing, you messed around with where you wanted your playing weight to be a lot. Like you're a naturally very lean person. But even then you were really aware of what you wanted your playing weight to be. And I don't think injury was the number one reason you were ever doing it. I think it was performance. Over.
And I think that is true. And so ultimately the performance benefits of improved body composition definitely outweigh the possible risk of injury. For my playing weight, I was comfortable at 185, 6'3", 6'4", 185. My summer weight got up to about 195-ish, and then immediately dropped 10 pounds as soon as training camp would start. And then I'd sit there the rest of the season. But yeah, how much better you're going to play and perform and feel and recover in terms of just having improved body composition. You're right, because the variables at the amount of force, and I mean it's definitely not.
It's there. No, it matters.
It's there.
Like,
but at what degree
it's there.
Is it there? We can't say for certain. And so it's actually like, it's so hypothetical. That's not really, it's not worth us discussing unless someone put in the time and effort to study it over the course of like 2 or 3 seasons, which is, I wish that Tobias Warner's Swedish study, it would have been cool if that would have been something that they equated, because that's probably one of the best, better longitudinal studies over the course of a season through 3 levels of pro, including women's pro.
Yeah. Oh, it's just like, it's the best. It's their lab and his work. It's just the best goalie research you can find, period. They're excellent over there. So maybe we'll link those in the show notes here. But if you're a goalie listening to this show and you haven't read all of the papers by Tobias Warner and in that group over in Sweden,
well, you know what we can do though? You know what we can do, because we're the science.
We can do a recap of those.
Yeah, as I say, we should do it. We can recap on a pod and discuss what they find, what they studied, limitations, because that's our job to interpret it for people, because we're the ones that spent the time, money, and effort to be nerds, and so we're the ones to help. We're gonna do the jocks' homework for them.
Yeah, but I think we wrap this up. I think like the clear thing. Well, so I think a few things. So the first one, the hockey science is like, we're still babies. Like hockey is still, we're still the fourth major sport in North America. In Europe, in countries where hockey might be more serious, there's just less people that are doing it. So, there's still lots of room to grow in the realm of hockey research. So I think from even the body composition research, it's hard to say. Like it probably is people who are probably in better physical shape, more muscle, lean mass, probably better at fitness stuff, probably have the potential to be more powerful on the ice if you have good genetics on top of that. But yeah, I think if we dive it in further than that, I think that's all we need to know is you need to find from a physical weight perspective, a mass perspective, you need to find the weight that you're comfortable playing at, that you feel the best at. And that is some trial and error, especially as you're growing up. If it's younger goalies, listening to your coaches who coach younger goalies, that's just going to change a lot as you grow. But I think the other second side of things is that you need to take yourself and your training seriously if you want to be the best performer that you can be, right? And that at the end of the day, body composition is a reflection of that. Gaining muscle and gaining lean mass is a product of taking your training seriously, taking your nutrition seriously, and taking your recovery seriously. And if you're doing those three things, hopefully you also have some good genetics too, and then like you might be less likely to get injured. I don't know.
Yeah.
But you'll
No, I think,
definitely
yeah,
put yourself in a better situation to perform.
yeah, you summarized it well. But it goes again, and then we're going to finish up. The last thought is we've said this before, where everyone gets obsessed with injury prevention. I know that we definitely used to. As with rehab professionals, it's our job to help recover those that are already injured and try to prevent it or reduce the likelihood, but you can't. And so it's better to have a performance focus because there's a lot more things that you can control in that sense, and then let the likelihood of injury ships kind of fall where they lie because you're checking off all the performance boxes as you train and try to be the best athlete and the best goalie you can be.
Yeah, and like I want to, and just so people fully understand that line of thought, like yes, no one wants to get hurt. We don't want anyone to get hurt either. But it's like if you're taking off the boxes of nutrition, of sleep, of your recovery, how you're feeling, your training during games and practices, those buckets that you're filling up for your performance are the same buckets that we would try to control if we were only looking at an injury lens.
Yeah.
Right? Like there's so much overlap there that I think there's no specific exercise that's going to prevent you from injuries. There's no 3 tricks to make sure your groin muscles are bulletproofed. It's just not that simple. Stuff is too complicated, and sometimes there is just an element of bad luck. So at the end of the day, hit those buckets, hit that training, hit that recovery, hit that nutrition, and definitely get that sleep.
Yeah.
And if you're doing that, you're in a good place.
Awesome. Well, thanks everyone for listening to the Goalie Science podcast presented by Resilient Hockey. Leave us a comment on Instagram, YouTube. Leave us a review, whether that you're listening on iTunes or Spotify. Is Apple Podcast?
Whatever podcast
you
hold the
listen to.
podcast.
It does help. Off season's coming up, so share it. If you have any questions, comments, concerns, let us know. And if you have any ideas for things that you'd like us to cover, don't hesitate to message us, and we'd love to talk about them. Well, Ben?
Jamie, until next time, pal.
So next week.